Good morning, everybody. And I am Liliana Paredes, and I'm going to be moderating this session, this panel. And I have to inform the group that the first speaker is not going to be participating today. Atiya Satar, Ungrading as a Feminist, the Colonial Practice, unfortunately, is not going to be talking today. So we're going to use the time to hear our two colleagues, Vianey Cabrera and Claudia Holguin Mendoza. And if everybody is ready, we're going to start with Vianey Cabrera. And Vianey Cabrera, okay, I see you now. She is joining us from Santiago Kenyon College from Orange County, California. And the title of her presentation is Ungrading in the Heritage Language Learners Classroom. Welcome, Vianey.
Thank you so much. Can I share my screen then?
Yes.
1 second. Okay. Can you see? Can everyone see? Okay. Thank you for being here. My name is Vianey Cabrera, and the title of the presentation is Ungrading in the Heritage Language Learners Classroom. In it, I will talk about the reasons behind the implementation of ungrading, how I did it in a course for heritage speakers. In this presentation, I will specifically talk about the following. We will start with the definition of what a heritage language learner is, describe the goals of heritage language instruction, talk about heritage language learners' experiences in the classroom, share 2 examples of ungraded assignments, share some students' responses, and I'll end with some conclusive thoughts. First, for the purposes of this presentation, the term heritage language learner will be used to refer to, and I will use the definition from Guadalupe Valdez, a student of language who is raised in a home where a non-English language is spoken. The student may speak or merely understand the heritage language and be, to some degree, bilingual in that language and in English and the heritage language. This speaks, among other things, to the life experiences of the heritage language learners and to their distinct proficiencies, knowledge or knowledges, and abilities. Recognizing the diverse linguistic proficiencies of the students is crucial for both educators and the students themselves. And this is especially true in classes tailored specifically for heritage language learners, where diverse linguistic levels and proficiencies exist within the same group. The reality is that heritage language learners and second language learners exhibit, again, distinct linguistic profiles. This chart on the screen highlights some key variations. In a language class setting, heritage language learners face what we may consider a disadvantage because of the way we usually teach languages. Consequently, they can benefit from instructional approaches that recognize their existing linguistic strengths, such as oral proficiency and social linguistic accuracy. For example, as you can see on the chart, heritage language learners have used and more experience using in real life tú, usted, which are formal and informal forms of address. For example, additionally, focusing on content and meaning during activities like reading can be particularly beneficial for heritage language learners as well. With this in mind, here is an overview of the main goals that have been proposed and many of us have used for heritage language instruction. And this is from Sarah Beaudry. The list which you have on the screen, talks about maintaining the heritage language. It's important to acquire, develop a prestige variety, expand the bilingual range, transfer literacy skills, acquire, develop academic skills in the heritage language, cultivate positive attitudes towards the heritage language, and develop cultural awareness. This provides instructors with a vision or a roadmap when developing curriculum for the heritage language classroom. Another important aspect for instructors to consider is the socio-affective component. In my teaching experience, I can share with you that I do an introductory activity that consists of a linguistic biography at the beginning of every semester. It is meant to have students get to know each other. In this activity, students are asked to introduce themselves and to discuss their relationship with Spanish, how they learned, for example, what part of the world their Spanish represents, and their feelings towards their own Spanish. It's not uncommon to hear students mention that they initially learned and spoke Spanish at home when they were kids, when they were younger, only to, quote unquote, lose it when they started elementary school. Some describe their Spanish using terms like mucho, pocho, or Spanglish. And more recently, identify or self-identify as no sabo kids. What consistently stands out, in my view, is that they use Spanish to articulate the idea of, quote unquote, losing the language, highlighting how deeply they have internalized negative feedback they have received about their linguistic abilities throughout their lives. To this point, Krashen discussed the impact of having received constant negative feedback when he talks about language shyness in heritage language development in the following way. Regarding heritage language speakers, he says that their imperfections are very salient to more proficient speakers who may respond by correcting and even with ridicule. Such responses can be devastating to less proficient heritage language speakers. Error correction and criticism do not help them. They have the opposite effect. Rather than risk error, they interact less in the heritage language. This sets up a vicious cycle. Less interaction means less input, and less input means less proficiency. And he adds, because language is such a clear marker of social group membership, it could also contribute to alienation from the heritage language group, which is counter to the vision that I mentioned in this one of the slides earlier about the goals of heritage language instruction. Addressing this mindset is fundamental when developing the curriculum for heritage language learners. Utilizing a teaching approach that relies on the one-size-fits-all model is an ineffective teaching strategy for students in general, including the heritage language learners. So in the next section of the presentation, I'm going to focus on why ungrading is an effective approach to address the issues. So, students in the heritage language classroom arrive in general with existing linguistic proficiencies. They may just not be as familiar with certain aspects of the language, such as the meta language or particular grammar rules. However, they arrive with a linguistic and cultural wealth of knowledge. In a sense, they already possess implicit and cultural knowledge. Their language journey is a personal one, many times based on how much input in their lifetimes they have received. Students should not compare their language skills to one another in the classroom, but rather focus on their own learning journey. Ungrading creates the space for this in the classroom. Ungrading allows students to focus on their learning through activities that invite self-reflection, like our keynote presenter was mentioning, and by exploring and making mistakes without the fear of being penalized for what they do not know. Students also continuously receive feedback to guide their learning, which they can use and apply in subsequent tasks. Additionally, ungrading helps create a positive learning environment. where students are incentivized to explore as they learn. And again, ungrading moves learners and instructors beyond traditional grading systems by purposely allowing students to focus more on their own learning rather than on the grade itself. And with this in mind, let's look at a couple of examples of activities that where I apply that ungraded. So, in the class that I taught, there were 3 areas that were primarily ungraded. This was a class for heritage speakers, mainly the reflections, homework assignments, and to some degree participation. So participation was not fully ungraded. Reflections and homework assignments were. The reflections, what were they? They were 1-page long summaries with a reflection component at the end. Students were asked to, I will share with you the guidelines, but overall, students summarized an article or a podcast. They would read an article. They would choose the article or listen to a podcast. Then the student provided a reflection by answering guiding questions, a reflection and a summary of what they read or heard. And there was no right or wrong answer when grading these assignments. As the instructor, I provided feedback on both grammar and content. And it was graded on a completion basis. Just to show you an example, the example of reflection. This was based, I have the objectives here, the introduction. The students were asked to, were asked to choose an article to read. And then they had to list a number of words or phrases that they had learned, and then they had to answer questions. There were open-ended questions to help them summarize and be able to do that, and to talk about what they knew about the topic already before reading the article, and to talk about why the content of the article that they read, for example, was how it was related, why it was important for Latinx communities in the US. And I asked them at the end also if they had any difficulty reading the article and what they learned. And that was a reflection portion of this activity. Again, the reflection assignments were designed to motivate students by providing them with the opportunity to explore and to find a topic that was of interest to them individually, an authentic text that they felt comfortable with according to their level of readiness. And they had a choice between reading an article and listening to a podcast. And they also had a choice, especially with the podcast, to listen to one in Spanish or one in English because they are bilingual. Again, this spoke about having options. We offered an alternative to those with different learning styles as well, as some may have preferred to read while others preferred to listen to a conversation. These reflection assignments provide a space for the students to succeed in meeting some of their learning goals, namely acquiring vocabulary, expanding the linguistic repertoire, being exposed to a formal register, depending on the type of text they chose, and to apply what they were reviewing in the classroom in terms of grammar, among other goals. Very important in this process was the reflection at the end of the assignment, where students were asked explicitly to discuss what they learned from the activity. And equally significant to the reflection itself was the targeted, the focused feedback provided by the instructor. I also wanted to mention that these reflections can also function as additional formative assessments or opportunities to assess if students are understanding the material. This was a language class. An important recommendation when working with grammar in the heritage language classroom, I have to mention this, is to focus on specific grammatical structures that have been identified as areas where heritage language learners and students need to work on. This recognizes that students already possess linguistic abilities and strengths, so grammar is focused and targeted. However, I did give homework assignments that emphasize grammar and the connection between form and meaning. So let's take a quick look at one of these assignments, and then I will elaborate on why I chose to do this and how ungrading had a place in it. The homework assignments consisted of Google Forms primarily. where students would watch a video, read something, answer questions on the content, and then they would go into the grammar explanations with some grammar exercises graded automatically, this was a Google form. Some questions were open-ended questions, and lately I've been adding a couple of more questions, like what did you learn from this activity? Indicate at least one or two things you learned and what you need to practice with. I've been asking them to set goals for themselves too. And when I reviewed the Google Forms, which were graded on a completion basis, I would provide feedback. One example is somewhere at the beginning of the course with the verb ser estar, which means to be in Spanish. Here I used a video. They answered questions, and here's where they went to read grammatical explanations. And this is where I have something to say. And then here, just to show you how it looked. Students would do this, and again, this would be graded on a completion basis. Why? As you can see, I assigned homework assignments that included explicit grammar instruction. I chose to do this because the students in my class had diverse, different motivations to enroll to take it. Some were fulfilling degree language requirements. Others were pursuing a minor or major in Spanish, while others were taking it as an elective. And it was not actually unusual for me to have graduating seniors who said that they were taking the class because they had this space. They were done with their requirements and they wanted to take a class on Spanish. And that was their elective. But specifically, students majoring and minoring in Spanish, I thought of them when assigning these homework tasks. They were going to be going on to higher level courses with second language learners who have had a lifetime of exposure, perhaps, to terminology and grammar rules. And I wanted to ensure that my students were equipped with the knowledge and grammatical terminology and other grammar rules to reduce any disadvantage in those future language courses. Recognizing that not every student was pursuing courses at a higher level, ungrading with this task provided an effective approach in that course that gave everyone flexibility and the opportunity to learn and explore without the fear of being penalized. And I mentioned briefly that I also did participation as an ungraded assignment, but it was not fully, when I implemented this, it was not fully ungraded. I did incorporate a traditional approach, but the important part in this participation graded is I also added open-ended questions where students would reflect on their participation. For example, in the middle, the second of the series of participation grades that students had to do, I asked them to reflect on how they did in the previous 5 weeks and to set goals for themselves for the next 5 weeks. And I would comment and go over this and give them feedback. Because of time, and I'm not going to go into that. But I wanted to address instructors' feedback. Instructor feedback focused on grammar points covered in class and on grammar aspects that heritage language learners commonly need to focus on. And this is where I do subscribe to the belief that in a heritage language course, one needs to focus on certain things that from experience and from research, we know that the heritage language learners need to work on. Overall, the goal was to personalize the feedback, to focus on progress, not so much on the product. And as an instructor, I got to know my students' strengths and identify what they needed to work on. Not everyone needed to work on the same thing. Again, although this was a course for heritage speakers, there were different levels within the single course. And by providing feedback, communication was constant. And that's what I wanted to sort of visually convey with this circle with the arrows. I would provide feedback. And for example, with the participation, I would talk to them, have a dialogue with them when the next time to the participation came up. Why ungrading the heritage language classroom? Overall, it creates another space for diversity in learning styles. I already mentioned this, but the one-size-fits-all approach may not address their needs. It reduces distractions, specifically the fear of grades, acknowledges students' different linguistic proficiencies, recognizes that students are diverse, and allows them to stay focused on the quality of their work. And I wanted to share with you some quickly some responses. I have to mention that another thing that resonated from the talk earlier today is that one is practicing and grading sometimes without being aware, and students are not aware either. So I didn't tell my students that I was practicing ungrading in the class, but I wanted to share with you a couple of quotes, comments that they gave after when the course ended. The first quote reflects what Krashen was referring to. The student said that class is a safe space to practice Spanish, especially as a heritage speaker. I've been made fun of for how I speak. The second quote also talks about how it's important to feel comfortable with the student, with their peers, and needed to feel comfortable and felt comfortable messing up, like he says, or she says, my sentences in Spanish. The next three talk more about ungrading. The first one says, I love the flexibility with all the assignments, and that it's not about grades, more about the quality of work we do so that we can improve our Spanish skills. And when talking about what was valuable about the course, the student said the flexibility of assignments and a non-numerical grading system. And the last one mentions feedback. We received valuable feedback on how to improve our grammar. So concluding thoughts, some of this has already been mentioned in the keynote speech earlier. Ungrading as a strategy in the heritage language learners classroom to motivate increased learning and invite exploration, to address diversity in learning styles. This made me recall universal design for learning, and we can also talk about differentiated teaching. To maintain the heritage language, which is one of the goals of heritage language instruction, along with cultivating positive attitudes towards the heritage language. To allow students to make mistakes without the fear of being penalized for what they do not know. And allow instructors to value our students' abilities, to foster learning independence, to foster a sense of belonging, because also in the class, we had a lot of discussions where students would connect and create community in the classroom. And in a way also to address issues of equity and social justice, which, I mean, this is not what I'm talking about in the course, but all of these things came to mind when I was preparing this presentation. And here's some references. I'm almost done. Thank you so much. I hope I did okay with the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vianey. Yeah, you did. I gave you an extra 5 minutes, so because we have the luxury of extra time. So now, please, yes, applause for Vianey Cabrera. And if there are any questions, maybe this is a time to raise your virtual hand, please. No questions? You can open your mic too. Yes, Olivia.
I would be really curious about the prompt for your linguistic biography conversation. I don't have very many heritage speakers in French, but I think it could be useful to even to direct non-heritage speakers towards sort of what their experience of language is in general, and getting them at the beginning of the class to really think about how they've learned a language in the past, how they feel about hearing and experiencing other languages. And it seems like, do you think it would be useful for non-heritage speakers to do that work?
That's such an interesting question. In my experience teaching the course, there was usually at least one person who was registered in the course, because the course was open to everyone, or is open to everyone. They don't have to self-identify as heritage language learners. And it was very interesting when they answered their own and shared their own experiences of how they learned the language. They were considered second language learners, and how they learned. Some would mention that they learned with friends, from friends, in the community, in classrooms, but they wanted to be in the class. So I used it only, that specific activity only in that classroom where I did have one or two students every time who would not be considered technically a heritage language learner. But I mean, I would say it would be interesting to use it in any course. I mean, it's about getting to know each other. It's an icebreaker in this class.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Marcos.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting, and I'm teaching a heritage language class for the first time this spring, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about you said that you didn't address the ungrading specifically, and could you speak a little bit more about that? And did you notice that because of these experiences that they've had, that they would gravitate more towards some sorts of assignments or pay more attention or effort into some than others? Or in the discussions in class, you didn't address the ungrading, but you made it clear that this was about their learning journey?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's interesting that again, like when I was listening to that keynote speech, a lot of things were going like, oh my gosh, I can relate to that. They were resonating. I started doing the reflections on either complete or not completed basis, the homework assignments, out of that concern that students who are not trained to think of Spanish as I'm using this conjugation, I'm using the conditional, I'm using, like, they just use it. It's in them. It's about us taking it out, right? And codifying it. My concern was codifying things because of the three different general groups that I had in the classroom. I did that, and I was not aware that it had a name. And so I was practicing it without it. So I never told them that this is what we're doing. It's called ungrading. But I always emphasize, I am very happy that you're here. I am super excited that you're here. I always told them I value the way they spoke. That's one of the first things we do in the class, talk about how the way we speak talks about who we are. It's part of our identity. And I would share with them, like when I was told that that's not how you say it. Me, who is considered a native speaker in technical terms, having been told. So I would share with them stories, and I wanted to emphasize to them that the way they speak is valuable, legitimate, and no one should be putting it down. So I always emphasize learning and sharing. And I didn't know it was called ungrading, so I didn't tell them. And once I started learning from my colleague, especially at that point, Laura Mesrobian, that was called ungrading, I considered, should I tell them, should I not? I didn't tell them that it was called that. I don't have an answer for that. Should we tell them, should we not? I would be curious to know what others think who have done it. I don't think it impacted negatively the quality of their work. For example, the reflections were extremely successful. And I had a student who, the last time I taught the class, I had a student who read something about Peru that was happening in Peru. This happened last year when even Machu Picchu was closed. And she was so interested in that. She didn't know about that. She found out by doing the reflection on the newspaper, the article that they had to read. And then she said that she wanted to follow up on that. The writing was amazing given the level. I mean, the interest was extraordinary. And she was getting a grade for just completing it. Students, in my experience, took pride in doing their best work. Yes, so I don't think I'm not sure if that was what the question was about, but sort of less compromising the quality of the work or not knowing if students are going to really apply themselves. In my experience, they did. I would also be curious to know if others have done it, what they've have found. Because I think it was more about welcoming, getting to them across explicitly that we welcome their thoughts, their views, that what they have to say is valuable. And yeah, they knew they were going to get a grade, a good grade.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think it's time for us to move to the next presentation. And Vianey, Cabrera, this is wonderful. I wish we could keep talking about all these points and issues. Very many thank you, Vianey, Cabrera, and I want to invite now Claudia, Holguin, Mendoza, and Maria Jimenez from the University of California, Riverside, and whose presentation is Can-Do Statements for Self-Evaluation in Critical Sociocultural Linguistics Literacy. Welcome, Claudia and Maria. I think you both are sharing the screen.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I will be sharing the screen. Please bear with us because we are not sure we're going to share the right screen. One sec.
So Vianey, quick question while we're here. Students, heritage students, they need to have a certain knowledge of, in your case, Spanish, right? So, but frequently I have students who claim not speaking Spanish but they join my 101 or 102 class, and obviously they have a linguistic package with them, so they always perform better. So is there any category for those students?
Okay.
Okay.
I think that I can share now. Okay. And one sec. I need to check that this one. All right. Can you see?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. Okay, so we'll start now, and Maria Jimenez will start the presentation now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Jimenez, and today I would like to discuss the transformative potential of Spanish language instruction, with a particular emphasis on the challenges that Latinx Spanish speakers in the United States face. The central idea of this presentation is the concept of critical sociocultural linguistic literacy, or CRISOL. This initiative developed from the need for educators to address situations and conversations in their classroom about racism and public perceptions of minority language in the United States. So how can we get ready to have those thought but necessary conversation in the classroom? How can we effectively address the issue that a previous US president criminalized many of our students and racialized trilingual people in the country? To promote empathy and social change, we are committed to encouraging and enabling educators and students to understand how people react emotionally. We have achieved considerably, but we still face challenges in language education. Language curriculum development has had a big effect on teaching Spanish in the US. As Guadalupe Valdez points out, it often reinforces dominant paradigms, which makes power differences worse. As educators, it's important for us to understand this process so we can improve our students' language experiences. But what does it look for a language education to move toward sociolinguistic justice? How can we create change in the classroom on a daily basis? How do we put critical pedagogies into practice in the classroom? Yeah. Based on previous research, Professor Claudia Mendoza and the team of the UCR LabCrit Lab developed CRISOL, Critical Language Awareness and Ideas of Racial Literacy, Critical Historicity, Stylistic Language Practices, and Symbolic Power are brought all together in CRISOL. This combination calls into questions current models of appropriateness and paves the way for a more open approach to language instruction. Located at the University of California at Riverside, the LACRID Lab is an active hub for cutting-edge research and the creation of new ways to teach. Our team is dedicated to sociolinguistic research and new ways of teaching with Crisol. The LACRID Lab research project aims to change the way that people think about language ideologies in the US, with a special focus on people who speak both English and Spanish along the border between US and Mexico. We disagree with the idea that these two languages are broken. Instead, we see them as a complex way of using language that shows a rich cultures in the borderlands. These initiatives promote sociolinguistic justice by challenging common language assumptions and encouraging critical, inclusive teaching methods. Our work includes critical pedagogy projects like open educational resources and a newsletter. We want to help educators appreciate their students' bilingual ways of thinking and communicating and help them to grow intellectually, emotionally, and personally. For instance, we are working with Dr. Evgeny at California State University East Bay on an important project that looks at how people are aware of being judged and how they use English borrowings and Mexican calor. Dr. Luz Maria Ede Hernandez is in charge of a different project at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater that focuses on how people use calor on the border between the United States and Mexico. The National Endowment for the Humanities is funding the Spanglish and Bilingualism in Latinx Studies project. This project aims to change the Latino and Latin American Studies major and minor at the University of California at Riverside. It promotes bilingualism and critical thinking about language and power in schools. This is in collaboration with Dr. Jorge Leal and Dr. Julie Weiss. By incorporating regional Spanish-English varieties, the Just Future Mellon Grant funded Crisol, a project that seeks to enhance the teaching of Spanish as a heritage language. It accomplishes this by incorporating race, critical race theory, and Latinx studies. This project involves the creation of the anti-racist and sociolinguistic justice curriculum. But then why is it necessary to use Crisol? Because differences in language are just not different words. They have also social meanings. Styles and symbolic power of language have a big impact on how people from different cultures see themselves. Sociolinguistic approaches to teaching Spanish help us to understand the different ways people speak and what they mean that in society. Having conversations about race, privilege, and intersectionality in the classroom help students think about how their actions fit into the bigger picture of history. We are excited about how Crisol could change things, and we can wait to have like an enlightening conversation with people from different fields and points of view about this.
Thank you, Maria. And I would like to now further explain a little bit more about the critical sociocultural linguistic literacy framework, for short, Crisol. So how do we put what we have learned into practice? Crisol is an attempt to give real-world information about what goes on in Spanish classes. It tells researchers and teachers how to deal with complicated pasts, fight racist ideas with tools such as critical race theory and racial linguistics, and encourage racial literacy to create a welcoming and understanding classroom. So first, let me talk a little bit more about critical language awareness as an independent framework, but that it became part of Crisol. So in critical language awareness, we look closely at the hidden language beliefs that are present in cultural items and actions by looking at the assumptions and biases that are embedded and often hidden in the way people talk. Critical language awareness helps us understand the power structures and societal and cultural effects that are at play. It gives us the power to question what we think is quote unquote normal language and see language as a living thing that shapes cultural stories. Also, we incorporate the element of critical history or critical historicity. And we look at the historical events and situations that have made linguistic communities what they are today. Understanding the historical context behind language and practices and social realities is important for figuring out its many layers of complexity. We can appreciate the rich tapestry of linguistic diversity and learn more about the power dynamics that affect how languages develop and change over time. Adding to this, we also look at the complicated social relationships and power structures that exist in linguistic communities. This is a third element that includes also racial literacy, reflexivity, and positionality of our own identities. We can have more fair conversations about language if we're aware of our own positionality and biases. The historical aspect, number 2, and social relations, including racial relations, number 3, are elements that we consider not optional. They are crucial for CRISL and complement critical language awareness analysis. If we do not include them, we risk leaving critical language awareness discussions at a superficial level, because critical language awareness as a framework was not systematized to study intersectional identity constructions and positionality, such as frameworks like critical race theory or racial linguistics, for instance. So in the context of the US, and particularly for the Spanish heritage language classroom, is crucial that we incorporate these elements into critical language awareness. Finally, the fourth dimension is choosing the sociolinguistic theoretical framework compatible with these aforementioned approaches, such as third-wave sociocultural linguistics that focuses on social meaning and identity formation. By focusing on these crucial sociolinguistic elements, we can develop what Claire Cramsch calls symbolic competence. In other words, social and linguistic styles are ways that people show who they are and how they fit in with their community. Symbolic competence helps us understand the complex meanings behind the words we use. And I'm very excited to share with you that this CRISL approach includes can-do statements that we have adapted from the ACTFL can-dos, but these are different, and I'll explain why. So the can-do statements for CRISL are an essential part of this framework and focuses on different kinds of literacy, as I mentioned. We cannot change an approach and call it anti-racist and then use the same traditional assessment tools. For example, assessing grammar in a traditional way. In this way, CRISL employs a self-assessment approach based on content or task-based activities. The most important thing about this approach is that it allows students to show how well they're learning or how much progress, according to themselves, they are making, especially about classroom discussions. It gives them a safe space to talk, reinforcing that their ideas are valued and important to the learning environment. This helps them feel like they belong and to respect differences. And this rubric, as I mentioned, based on the can-dos of ACTFL, is adapted to the sociocultural and linguistic elements of CRISL that I just mentioned, the 4 elements. And CRISL does more than just meet traditional learning outcomes. It gives the students a sense of control, which makes them think about and take action on civic issues that affect how language is used in their communities. It helps students see and fight biases against Spanish varieties that are not privileged, leading to a more welcoming language community in the US. The can-do's assessment method changes things. Not only does it make learning different language varieties in a more engaged manner, but it also encourages students to make smart choices about language maintenance, out against discrimination, and get involved in civic life. In collaboration with my colleague Noelia Sanchez-Walker, we conducted last year a study in a Crisol-based classroom teaching Spanish in the US. And we included these sentences for the material that we were teaching and asked students to assess themselves at the beginning of the quarter and at the end. And one of the statements, the can-do statements was, for example, I can explain what Spanglish is, where the word comes from, the different meanings it has for different types of people, and why some people attack it so much. And you can see that there is a difference between their self-assessment in at the beginning of the quarter in a continuum of I can do it with difficulty, I can do it with some difficulty, and then I can do it. And another example of another statement is I can explain in detail using all elements of political and economic history why the Puerto Rican band Calle 13 can say that they are from the United States, even though they composed and sang a famous Latin American song. So this also, of course, explains the bicultural identity and bilingual identity of Calle 13 members, right? So we can see also how students assess themselves and that there is a difference. And of course, this data is also supported with qualitative comments. And unfortunately, we don't have time to show the comments, but just to give you an example that this is work that is based on research. And just to conclude, this way of teaching is central for supporting students to understand how language, race, and white supremacy interconnect and affect each other in complicated ways. This is not a simple thing or a simple way of teaching, right? We really need to engage and involve in different methods. The idea of racial literacy is at the heart of this approach. It is not enough to just understand words in a literal way. We also need to know how language works both symbolically and literally when it comes to racial stratification and categorization. It is not a choice to use anti-racist teaching methods when teaching Spanish. It is a must. It means rethinking how we teach, what we teach, and the social and historical settings in which we work. It's about making sure that our students are not only good at language, but also good at being socially aware and working to make the world more fair and just. Thank you very much. And if you have